Liar, again, the bailiff barked, his voice cracking through the courtroom like a whip. 3 seconds later, the gaunt man in the corner collapsed, knees crumpling like paper. No one moved. No one helped. Not until the judge slowly rose from his seat, face blank as polished stone, and uttered a sentence that silenced the room. This court owes him more than its scorn. Who was this unwashed drifter in torn clothes? And what did Judge Halberd Grayson know that no one else remembered? Let us know where you're watching from, because somewhere in this spinning, distracted world, someone still believes the past deserves to be seen. Lyle Trent had scrubbed the steps of the Crestwood Municipal Court for precisely 1,247 mornings. At 63, his fingers were curled from arthritis and cold, his spine hunched from years of concrete sleep. But every day at 5:59 a.m., he showed up with a rusted bucket and a mop that had survived 3 decades longer than it should have. Nobody had hired him. No one paid him. The court building had become his cathedral, and he, its silent, unpaid janitor. Around town, they called him Leaky Lyle. Some said it with affection. Most, like they were describing a stubborn stain. But this Tuesday in late October, Lyle was different. Same duct-tape sneakers, same greasy jacket with mysterious stains that might predate the Obama administration. But today, around his neck, was something new. A small, neatly folded strip of faded cloth he kept adjusting, like it wouldn't sit right against his skin. Inside courtroom 2B, a dispute was simmering. The Delacourt family insisted their late aunt's house had been fraudulently sold while she was comatose. Lyle had no intention of getting involved. He preferred the background. He lived in the background. But 3 weeks ago, while cleaning pigeon crap off the marble lion by the courthouse entrance, he'd overheard something explosive. Preston Kravitz, the buyer, confessed to his attorney that he knew old Aunt Edith wasn't mentally sound when she signed the deed. Lyle remembered every word. Every single word. The Delacourt lawyer tracked Lyle down behind a shuttered laundromat, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like pickles and engine oil. After 2 burgers and a promise of clean socks, Lyle agreed to testify. Now, he sat in the gallery, staring at the judge's seal, the cloth at his neck, suddenly feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. The murmurs started fast. Why is he here? They letting hobos testify now? Check if he's high. Judge Halberd Grayson presided like a man carved from old granite, 60. Silver hair like surgical steel, robes so black they seemed to drink light. He was known for 2 things, brutal efficiency and emotional constipation. If he ever smiled, no camera had caught it. The trial was procedural until the bailiff called Mr. Lyle Trent to the stand. The room quieted, not out of respect, out of morbid curiosity, like someone just let a raccoon into a bank. Lyle stood slowly, knees cracking, and shuffled to the witness stand like a man marching into gunfire. Please state your name for the record, the clerk said. Lyle Trent, he replied, voice gravelly and thin like radio static. And your current address? Lyle hesitated. Roundabout town. Varies. His eyes darted toward the exit. Snickers followed. Someone muttered, "This'll be good." But when Lyle spoke, something shifted. His account was crisp, his recall razor sharp. He recited the overheard confession with a precision that left no wiggle room. Dates, times, tone. Even the smirk on Kravitz's face. Still, sweat trickled down his face. Not nerves, something deeper. Feral fatigue, like a man choking on old memories. Then came the defense attorney. Mr. Trent, you've been unhoused for how long now? 8 years, Lyle answered, eyes narrowing. And do you think your, situation might cloud your memory? The lawyer asked with a crocodile smile. Lyle's hand instinctively rose to the folded cloth at his neck. My memory's fine. So's my hearing. Still, wouldn't you agree that a person in your position might embellish for attention? The words landed like a slap. Lyle blinked. His throat moved, but no sound came out. I don't, he began, then stopped. His fingers tightened around the edge of the stand until his knuckles whitened. Mr. Trent? The judge asked, voice uncharacteristically soft. No reply. Lyle's breathing faltered. The courtroom lights glared like stage floodlights. 8 years of hunger, frostbite, and being invisible were coming due all at once. His legs gave out. His body dropped with a bone-crunching thud. Lyle Trent, Purple Heart recipient, Silver Star holder. The man who'd once saved 19 lives during a failed rescue in Kandahar hit the courtroom floor like a sandbag tossed from a chopper. The first to speak was the bailiff, not with concern, with disdain. He's pulling this crap again. Murmurs, gasps, no movement. No one reached for a pulse. No one knelt. Until Judge Grayson stepped down, his expression unreadable, his robe trailing like a shadow. He walked to Lyle, crouched beside him, and gently rolled him over. The cloth around Lyle's neck had come loose. It wasn't just fabric. It was an American flag, small and fraying, and pinned discreetly on the inside. Facing inward like a private reminder was a silver star. By the end of the day, videos were everywhere. TikTok, YouTube, local news sites. Angles varied. The collapse, the unmoving crowd, the moment the judge knelt. But none showed the full picture. So the internet did what it always does, filled in the blanks with fiction and fury. Homeless guy, fake seizure to delay trial. Classic. Wait, why'd the judge kneel? He knew him, didn't he? Bro, that cloth looked like a flag. These people will do anything for sympathy. Wake up, America. Something's off here. That judge looked broken. Local news gave the story the usual treatment. Transient man interrupts trial. Court delays justice. But something deeper was stirring. The internet roared with opinions. Some shouted that drifters didn't belong in courtrooms. Others whispered about cover-ups. But only 3 people chose to dig deeper. One of them was Isabel Cruz, a 26-year-old law intern who wiped down courtroom benches at night to scrape through her final year of school. She'd seen Lyle Trent arrive every morning like clockwork, mop in hand. Now, something about him tugged at her curiosity. After his collapse, she tried searching military archives, but Lyle's file? Gone, redacted, or simply erased. That's not normal, she told her supervising attorney. You always find something, but it's like he never existed. Meanwhile, the internet spun itself into chaos. One Facebook group, Crestwood Uncovered, branded Lyle a stolen valor fraud. They claimed the medals were thrift shop knockoffs and his collapse was courtroom theatrics. But another voice began pushing back. A smaller group, led by ex-military locals, wasn't so sure. One of them, Gus Hardin, a Gulf War vet and commander at the local VFW, posted a blog that quietly went viral. I've seen 100 broken men come home. But I've also seen men who walk like ghosts, heavy, steady, always scanning. This guy? He moves like that. That's not something you can fake. But the most haunting line didn't come from an article or blog. It came from a now-deleted YouTube comment buried under the video of Lyle's collapse. The account, ZeroWolf77. The message, if he's still alive, then maybe we weren't left behind after all. It vanished within hours. But Isabel Cruz had taken a screenshot. She didn't know why. Instinct, maybe. Lyle Trent, meanwhile, stayed silent. The day after his fall, he was released from county hospital with an IV bruise, a diagnosis of exhaustion, and no place to go. So, as if nothing had happened, he returned to his ritual, scrubbing steps, wiping railings, watching without being seen. When reporters swarmed him, he muttered only 2 words, no comment, and got back to work. But privately, it was crushing him. That night, tucked behind the courthouse near the old generator hum, Lyle pulled out a battered notebook he'd carried since his service days. He wrote only one line, "Nobody needs to know. But if one person remembers, I won't fully vanish." The next morning, Isabel arrived early for her shift. There, on the stone steps, was the notebook. Lyle must have dropped it while ducking yet another nosy reporter. She picked it up, intending to return it. But the moment she opened it, her breath caught. Inside were pages of crisp handwriting, not the scrawl of a madman, but the careful chronicles of a man who watched everything. Mrs. Long's daughter smiled today, first time in weeks. New lawyer in 2B, nervous. Hope he learns fast. Judge Grayson looked tired again. Bad dreams? But it was a scribble near the back that froze her. Halberd G. Bravo Unit 9. Kosovo. 1999. He made it home. That's enough. Isabel blinked. Halberd Grayson, Judge Grayson, had served in the military. She'd worked in his courtroom for months and never once heard him mention service, let alone a combat deployment. Flipping through more pages, she found several entries that hinted at shared trauma. Dreamed of the compound again. The fire. The screaming. H heard the choppers and flinched. He remembers. 23 years next month. I wonder if H knows I'm here. Isabel Cruz, law intern by day and janitor by night, was now holding something astonishing, a direct connection between the most austere figure in Crestwood's legal system and its most invisible man. But that notebook held more than history. It held the deliberate invisibility of someone who had chosen silence, who had avoided medals and parades. The ethical storm hit her instantly. Did she have the right to expose Lyle's past? Or the duty to challenge Judge Grayson's potential conflict of interest? Or was this something far more complicated? Something that demanded justice of a different kind? That evening, she made her choice. Instead of handing the notebook back to Lyle, or turning it in to court authorities, she did something she couldn't have imagined a week ago. She walked to the judge's private chambers and knocked twice. When he opened the door, she held out the notebook. "Your Honor," she said, "I think you need to see this." Judge Grayson stared at the worn leather. Then, for the first time since she'd known him, Isabel saw something shift in his face. Not shock, not anger, something older. He took the notebook with trembling hands, flipped to the marked page, read the line about Bravo Unit 9, closed his eyes. When he opened them, they shimmered. "I owe that man more than silence," he murmured, echoing the very words courthouse security cameras had caught days earlier, but no one had truly understood. "Your Honor?" Isabel asked softly. Grayson looked at her, really looked as a man who'd buried a part of himself for 23 years and suddenly realized he wasn't alone anymore. "Miss Cruz," he said, "tomorrow morning, I'm going to tell this courthouse and this city who Lyle Trent really is." That night, Judge Halberd Grayson sat alone in his study, surrounded by case files thick with dust and sealed orders marked confidential. But the notebook lay open in front of him, its inked pages the quiet heartbeat of a ghost he'd left behind. Memory surged like a flood. Kosovo, 1999. Lieutenant Halberd Grayson, then 35, had served as a military liaison during the NATO operation. Embedded with Bravo Unit 9, a special ops team tasked with extracting foreign diplomats from a besieged outpost. The mission went sideways fast. Intelligence was garbage. Resistance was heavier than predicted. They were pinned, injured, outnumbered, and cut off. And one soldier had done the unthinkable. The escape route was blown. That's when Staff Sergeant Lyle Trent made a decision that saved 19 lives and shattered his own. Judge Grayson remembered the chaos, the ringing in his ears, the dust in his lungs, and Lyle bursting through smoke, hauling him like deadweight over his shoulder. Blood already seeping down Lyle's back from embedded shrapnel. He remembered the unbelievable sight of Lyle charging back into the compound not once, but 3 times, pulling out wounded teammates under direct fire. The evac helicopters had arrived just in time for the last lift. The mission never happened officially. The reports were sealed, filed under black ink and false dates. Lyle's heroism was buried inside folders that wouldn't see daylight for 25 years. He'd been nominated for the Medal of Honor. Grayson had written the submission himself. But bureaucracy doesn't reward ghosts. Instead, Lyle received a Silver Star in a hollow ceremony. No press, no family, no parade. Just a few stiff-backed officers and a file stamp. The last time Grayson saw him was in a military hospital in Stuttgart. Lyle sat by the window, bandaged, staring into nothing. His wounds were healing. But his silence was deeper than the scars. "I can't go back and pretend this meant nothing," Lyle had said, eyes dull. "But I can't go back and say what it really was either." Grayson had promised to stay in touch. They all had. But Special Forces veterans don't form circles, they scatter. Grayson went home. Law school. Marriage. Robes. Prestige. Not once had he tried to find Lyle Trent until now. The next morning, Judge Grayson arrived at Crestwood Courthouse earlier than ever. He had made calls overnight, official calls. He'd requested partial declassification of Lyle's service record, the kind of clearance only grief and rank could unlock. By 9 a.m., Courtroom 2B was packed, every pew filled with reporters, clerks, and curious locals. Whispers buzzed about a formal statement involving the homeless guy. Lyle sat quietly in the back, as usual, unaware the air was about to shift around him forever. Judge Grayson entered in full robes, but this was not the same judge who had commanded silence days earlier. The authority was there, but the walls were down. This was a man about to break 23 years of silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice measured. "Before we begin today's docket, I have a statement to deliver." He locked eyes with Lyle, who flinched under the focus. "Yesterday, a man collapsed in this courtroom. Some of you witnessed it. Most of you saw it online. There has been speculation about that man's worth, his truth, his right to be heard. I want to clarify things." The room was holding its breath. "The man who collapsed yesterday is Staff Sergeant Lyle Trent, United States Army, Special Operations, recipient of the Silver Star, the Purple Heart, and the man who saved 19 lives in Kosovo in 1999, including mine." Gasps erupted, but the judge raised a hand. Silence returned. Sergeant Trent served in an operation that never made the news. His record was sealed. His wounds were not. The trauma he carried didn't fit neatly into a discharge paper or VA claim. It followed him home, into shadows. Lyle's eyes met Grayson's shock, disbelief, and something softer beneath it: recognition. "For 23 years, I have built a life made possible by a soldier whose name this town never knew. I went to law school, became a judge, started a family, because that man decided I was worth saving. And for 23 years, he has slept on benches, scrubbed our steps, and faded into the periphery of a world that never bothered to ask his story." Grayson stepped off the bench just like he had during Lyle's collapse, but this time with purpose. Deliberate, electric. He walked straight to Lyle's row. "This morning that ends." From inside his robe, he withdrew a small velvet box. Inside, a silver star, polished and pristine. Along with it, a crisp certificate bearing Lyle's full name. This medal was awarded to Sergeant Trent in 1999 for extraordinary bravery under fire. It was stolen with his belongings several years ago. This replacement has been issued by the Department of Defense at my request. Grayson's voice grew firm, resonant with emotion unfiltered. "I do not stand before you today as Judge Grayson. I stand as a man whose life was saved by someone this community has dismissed for over 2 decades. I stand here to say that some debts aren't paid with money or silence." He extended the box to Lyle. "Sergeant Trent," he said, "please stand." Lyle hesitated. Then, slowly, painfully, he stood. His clothes were threadbare. His posture was not. Straightened by something deeper than muscle memory. Pride. Identity. He has never asked for thanks, never demanded respect, never told his story. But silence is no longer noble, and recognition is long overdue. Grayson opened the pin on the medal and stepped forward. "By the authority of this court, and in the presence of this community, I return to Staff Sergeant Lyle Trent the honor that should never have been taken from him." He pinned the silver star onto Lyle's coat. The courtroom didn't clap. They didn't need to. Every person watched as something invisible became undeniable. The man who had been ignored, scoffed at, reduced to a meme, stood not in triumph, but in truth. "This courtroom owes him more than silence," Grayson said, voice steady. "It owes him the dignity, the recognition, and the humanity that 23 years of ignorance have stolen. Lyle didn't speak, he just raised his head, and for the first time in decades, let himself be seen. The first to stand was Isabel Cruz, then the judge himself. Then, like a wave, every person in the room rose to their feet, not in celebration, but in understanding, in respect. The video spread faster than scandal ever could, but this time it wasn't a spectacle of disgrace. It was something else. A moment of truth. A long overdue reckoning. A story not of shame but of recognition. Within 48 hours, national news had picked it up. Judge honors homeless veteran he once served with became the headline that reminded people of something simple. Even in a divided world, the truth still matters, even if it takes 23 years to speak it. But the real shift wasn't in headlines or viral videos. The real change was happening in Crestwood itself. 1 week after Judge Grayson's public revelation, the community launched a quiet fundraising effort. The goal was simple: restore the apartment building Lyle Trent had lost 8 years ago, not for him to live in, but to convert it into a veterans resource library. A space for returning soldiers who had been chewed up by the same silence that nearly buried Lyle. The building had been derelict for years, county-owned, scheduled for demolition. But within days of the courtroom's awakening, the Crestwood commissioners voted unanimously to donate the building to the cause. Isabel Cruz, the intern whose discovery had cracked everything open, volunteered to oversee the project. She was offered a full scholarship from a prominent veterans advocacy nonprofit, a dream path for any aspiring lawyer. She deferred it for a year. "I've learned more about justice in 7 days," she told the local paper, "than I did in 2 years of law school. Sometimes justice isn't about verdicts. Sometimes it's about making sure the right people are remembered." The renovation took 3 months. During that time, Lyle still showed up every day at the courthouse. But now, he did more than clean. Isabel had asked him to help choose the first wave of books for the library. It was the first time in years anyone had asked him for an opinion that mattered. He took the task seriously, carefully, like the way he had once carried wounded friends across bullet-scorched courtyards. Inside the library, above the main reading area, Isabel hung a single page from Lyle's notebook, the one that started it all. "Nobody needs to know. But if just one person remembers, I won't completely disappear." Below it, she placed a small brass plaque. "In honor of all veterans whose stories deserve to be heard." One cold morning, as Lyle scrubbed frost off the courthouse steps, a man approached him, middle-aged, nervous hands, a small white card held tightly between his fingers. "Mr. Trent?" the man asked, voice cautious. I don't know if you remember me. I was one of the people who commented online. I said some things, assumed some things." Lyle looked up. He didn't recognize the man's face, but he recognized the type. "I was wrong," the man continued. "I judged you without knowing a damn thing. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." He held out the card. Lyle took it. 3 words were written in pen. "I was wrong." The man didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked away. Lyle watched him disappear, then slid the card carefully into the front pocket of his shirt like it was something worth keeping. The Veterans Resource Library opened on a bright blue sky January morning. There were no reporters, no senators, just a gathering of about 20 townspeople who had watched a quiet man fall to the ground and rise again in their collective memory. Grayson was there, Isabel, Lyle, a few old veterans with haunted eyes and stiff backs. But the most important guests were 15 students from Jefferson Elementary. Their teacher, Mrs. Cooper, had brought them not just to see books, but to meet the man who reminded the town that history lives next door. As the kids wandered through the small space, the padded reading corner, the shelf of memoirs, the display case of medals and letters, they stopped at the framed notebook page on the wall, the one that had changed everything. Then something remarkable happened. As the tour ended, the children began to file past Lyle, who stood quietly near the door. No one told them what to do, but one by one, each student paused. Each placed a hand over their heart. Silent, intent, the kind of gesture you make when someone tells you a story that matters. The first child, a girl in pigtails and pink boots, stared up at Lyle and then pressed her hand to her chest the same way she did during the pledge. And then the next child, and the next. 14 more little hands, across 14 tiny hearts, walking past a man in frayed sleeves, like he was a statue, in a hall of heroes. Lyle didn't move. He just watched. For years, children had crossed the street to avoid him. Parents had pulled them away. Now, they were showing him respect not because they were told to, but because they understood. When the last child had passed, Lyle turned toward the library's shelves stocked now with stories he helped choose. He looked at the chairs where veterans might one day sit and remember, at the wall where his old words were framed in quiet defiance of the world's amnesia. Isabel approached him, smiling. "What do you think?" she asked. Lyle was silent for a long beat. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the white card the man had given him earlier. "I think," he said finally, "that admitting you were wrong is harder than being right the first time." He looked at her, then back at the card. But both matter. That evening, for the first time in months, Lyle wrote a new entry in his notebook. He sat in one of the library's soft chairs, still warm from where the children had sat, still echoing with the memory of hands across hearts. "Sometimes justice doesn't come early," he wrote, "but when it comes, it brings more than closure. It brings the next generation learning to remember." He paused. Maybe that's enough to build on. Outside, the courthouse steps waited for another morning's cleaning. But inside this small, repurposed library, a different kind of service had begun, the service of memory, of story, of making sure that no one would fade without someone seeing them first. Lyle never gave a speech. He never asked to be known. But when he fell, a man in robes had stepped down to remind the world who he once was. Lyle Trent never demanded recognition. For 23 years, he swept steps, carried secrets, and wore medals the world never saw. He existed in the gaps between headlines, between assumptions, between the way things were and the way they should have been. Sometimes it takes a judge stepping off his bench to remind us heroes don't always come in uniforms. They don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they wear threadbare jackets and carry burdens too heavy to explain. The video that changed everything didn't spread because of spectacle. It spread because it captured something rare, something real. The moment when truth overpowers assumption. When silence gives way to acknowledgement. When a community decides to see someone they'd ignored for too long. Some debts aren't paid with medals. They're paid with remembrance, with humility, and with the understanding that worth isn't found in appearance but in character. Have you ever seen someone forgotten, only to be remembered by the one person who chose to look again? Tell us below. Subscribe for more stories like this, where forgotten courage finds its voice again.